Hello, I'm Paul Carroll, technical writer for Digital Photo Magazine, and welcome to this video tutorial on the smart way to convert your RAW files. We're going to convert one of the files from my weekend workshop shoot, where I photographed flowers in my garage. I've picked out the shot that I want to work on, and I've opened it in Photoshop CS3, which has launched Adobe Camera Raw. The RAW file doesn't need a lot of work, but I find this stem area in the bottom right hand corner and some of these leaves to the right of the flower a little distracting. So I just need to darken them sufficiently so they become less of a distraction. The problem is though, what's the best way of doing this? The obvious way is to reduce the exposure, and if I use the exposure slider here on the left hand side, I can reduce the exposure globally across the whole image. So if I go to an exposure value of -1, they do become less distracting. However, I've also darkened down the flower, which is now underexposed and quite frankly looks a bit rubbish. So the technique that we'd usually use to do this is a dual RAW conversion. So I'll first open the image as shot with the flower nicely exposed. I'll then open the RAW file again to launch Adobe Camera Raw, and this time I'm going to reduce the exposure, so I'm going to go to about a stop and a half. Go a little bit further, there we go. And I'm going to open that image also into Photoshop. And so now if I drag them side by side, we've got two separate RAW conversions which I need to combine using layer masks to get the best results from each of the conversions. So I'll just very quickly do that. Get my layers palette open, need to add a mask to there, make sure I'm on black, I've got a brush, and now I can mask through from my top conversion through to my darker stem conversion underneath and just really darken down these distracting areas. There we go, that's done very quickly, but that gives you the idea. This process does seem a little complicated though, especially considering all the information to correctly expose the flower and underexpose the stem is already in our RAW file. So why can't we just make a single conversion that deals with both areas in the best way? Well, with the latest generation of Adobe Camera Raw, version 5 and above, you now can with the new localized adjustment tools. These new tools are only compatible with Photoshop CS4. So if your image editing software is older than that, you won't be able to benefit from these new tools, unless you have Lightroom 2, which also has a very similar set of localized adjustment features. And that's what I'm going to use to convert this RAW file. So I've got all of the shots from my shoot open in Lightroom 2, and I'm in the library module at the moment, and I've worked my way through all of the pictures, and I've picked out the one that I want to work on, and I've given it a star rating of 5. Now to convert the RAW file, I need to switch into the Develop module, and I can do that by just clicking on the word Develop in the top right hand corner. Now all of these tabs down the right hand side, the Basic, Tone Curve, Grayscale, Split Stoning, Detail, Vignettes and Camera Calibration, these are all the controls that we have over our RAW file, and they're basically exactly the same as the controls that you have in Adobe Camera Raw, although they are laid out a little bit differently. In addition to these though, we also have these new localized adjustment tools, and they sit just underneath the image histogram. We have the spot removal tool, which is basically the same as cloning. We also have the red eye removal tool and the graduated filter and adjustment brush. And it's these two tools, the graduated filter and the adjustment brush, which I'm now using all of the time to convert my RAW files. And so we're going to look at the graduated filter first. So if I just click on it, you'll see that it opens another panel showing all of the effects that we can adjust. So for example, we've got the exposure, brightness, contrast, saturation, clarity and sharpness, and we can control any of those effects with the graduated filter. Now all of these sliders are available to view in a different view as well, which I actually prefer. So I'm going to just click here on the Show Effects Sliders icon, and that's going to show me all of my sliders. And at the moment you can see I've got my exposure set to 1, brightness, contrast, saturation, clarity, sharpness to 0, and color white. So if I added a graduated filter at the moment, all that it would do is it would increase the exposure by 1 stop. But what I want to do is I want to darken down that stem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my exposure first. So I'm going to reduce the exposure slider to -2, and you'll notice as I do this it's having no effect on the image. That's because I haven't added my graduated filter yet. Okay, so I'm going to add it now. So holding down my left mouse button, I can now drag my graduated filter over the image, and you can see that as I do, the image is changing, and I've now darkened down that stem in the bottom right hand corner. So once you've dragged the graduated filter over the image in the right place, you can just release your left mouse button and that's the gradient applied. We don't have to stop there though. We can continue to adjust these sliders and fine tune the adjustment. So for example, I can lower the exposure even further and you can see as I do, the image is just darkening down in that bottom right hand corner even further. Or I could, just for the sake of demonstration, pump up the saturation or reduce the saturation. You can see there that the bottom right hand corner has now gone into black and white. There's a bit of a problem with this gradient mask for this particular job however, and that's the effect is spilling over into the bottom right hand corner of the flower and affecting the exposure. Don't worry though, because we're working with raw, none of the changes that I've currently made are destructive. So all I need to do is hit the reset button in the bottom right hand corner and that returns the image to the as shot original raw file. A more appropriate adjustment tool for this job is the adjustment brush, and that's over here on the right hand side of the graduated filter. So I'm just going to click on that and you can see that we've got exactly the same effect control sliders in the top part of the panel, but we've also now got a second section of the panel which allows us to control our brush size. So by controlling my brush size, I can then paint adjustments onto the image in any area that I like. So what I think I'm going to do is I want to completely lose this leaf here and this leaf here and these leaves here, but I'm going to leave the main part of the stem and the leaves coming off it. So first I'll deal with these loose leaves here. So I'm going to drop the exposure to -4. The brush that I've got at the moment's too large, so I'm just going to knock that back to around a 4 pixel brush. Looks okay. The feathering at the moment is set to 100. It's far too feathered because I'm going to have to paint right up to the edge of that petal there, so I need it to be quite sharp. So I'm going to drop that down to say a feather radius of 2, and now I can just paint onto the image. So I'll paint over this leaf here, and as you can see, as I paint over it with an exposure value of -4, it's just turning completely black and blending into the background. I have to work quite carefully here up to the edge of that petal. Okay, that's got rid of that distracting leaf, and this one down the bottom. Just get rid of that one. Again, I'm just going to have to work quite carefully when I get to the edge of the petal. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Okay, next job to do is just to darken down this section of the stem here. So I need to apply a second adjustment of brush effect. So I can do that just by simply clicking the new button up in the top right hand corner here. That gives me a new adjustment brush. It still preserved my settings from my first adjustment, which is -4, and we know that's going to be far too strong just to darken down that stem area. So I'm going to knock that slider back to -1/2 a stop. I'll increase my brush size ever so slightly just using the square brackets key on the keyboard, and then I can just paint over this stem in the bottom right hand corner just to darken that down a bit and make it less of a distraction. Okay, there we go. Okay, that stem's looking a lot better, but I've actually just noticed I've got a tiny bit of flare on the left hand side here. I don't know whether you're going to be able to pick it out on the video, but I need to darken that down as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually revert back to my first adjustment brush adjustment, which if you remember was that -4 exposure. And I can do that by simply clicking on this filter pin here. And if I hover over the filter pin, you can see that it's bringing me up a quick mask, which shows where I've painted and indicates the areas that I've painted over. So I've gone back to -4 if you have a look at the exposure value on the panel there on the right hand side, and now I can just paint over this bit of flare. I'm just going to increase my brush size to do it, and there you go. I've just removed that flare completely. Okay, just one last adjustment to make, and that's to add some sharpness to this area of the flower, the stamen in the flower, just to really give us a focal point to the image. So I'm going to need another adjustment brush to do that. So I'm just going to click on the new button again. This time I'm going to leave the exposure set to 0, but I'm going to crank up the sharpness slider to around a value of 50. I want my brush to be a fair bit more feathered this time, so we get a nice graduated effect and not too harsh. Brush size of 18 looks okay, and now I can just paint sharpness around this area of the flower over the stamen. Okay, release my left mouse button when I finish painting, and then just check the area that I've added the sharpness to by hovering over the filter pin. You can see that's looking pretty good. Actually, I think what I want to do as well is I just want to lighten that part of the flower because it's looking a little bit dark in there. So as we did before, I can now just continue to tweak these sliders to adjust the raw picture information in my image. So if I crank that exposure up to, well, stop and a half there is looking far too much, so I'm just going to crank that down, say just, well, 3/4 of a stop. That's looking much better and really giving us a focal point to the image. There we go, nearly finished now. But what I've decided is actually that part of the stem there, that flower just coming off, is still looking a little bit distracting. So back to my filter pin here, I'm on -4. I'm going to use the left hand square brackets key on the keyboard just to reduce my brush size again, and I'm going to reduce the feathering. I'm just going to knock that back to a low figure of say 4, and I'm just going to paint over that and just completely lose that bit of flower as well. Okay, there we go. I think that's looking a lot better. So that's the real smart way to convert your raw files, using the new localized adjustment tools. So if you do have Photoshop CS4 or Adobe Lightroom 2, then make sure you get the update for the latest version of Camera Raw. Then you can give this technique a go using the start image flower.dng from off the CD. If you don't have any of these software packages, however, then you really should consider upgrading, because they'll give you the latest raw feature set, and it's a lot more intuitive when you're converting your raw files. I really hope you've enjoyed this technique. Cheers.